So Sovay and I have been in a bit of email conversation, but we've never met before. So there's a sense of, trying to establish connections over email and think, what draws us to speak to one another in the first place, because this is not a tick box exercise. It's a fascination exercise, it's a curiosity exercise. It's like, so who are you? And what do you do? And how did that begin? And, where are your current preoccupations and what draws us together and what might we think, let's interrogate that just a little bit, not as a kind of challenge, what do you mean? But as something that is, can, open up the envelope, if you like, of all our thinking. And what's being said, what's being thought, what's being done. Because this is about art as well. This is about artistic making and social change making. And where are the links between those two things? How does that work together? And what challenges those things? How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds a lot. I'm processing it through my head, and I can see that you printed out that email I sent you.
Yes, that's right.
All those tendrils.
And those some of those questions as well. And I've been looking at your latest thing with Mescla.
Latest pamphlet, yeah.
Yeah, and your website, of course, which is very informative. And no, it's good to have that. If you haven't met someone before, how do you make a connection with them? How do you think? And for me, I guess it's always the question is, what is it that you're doing, and how did that begin? I always go back a little bit to the beginning. What pushed you into doing something like this? And I know some of those questions, language is so tricky sometimes. So how did you begin? Is not like, what are your credentials and where did you go to school and all that kind of stuff. But, what inspired you and what kind of discoveries have you made? Let's take one thing at a time. Inspiration then.
Well, I was thinking about it. I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days when you'd asked originally about like where it came, like where it started out sort of being an artist. And I was thinking about art being a sort of protected private space. And a language, and I don't mean like the art world, but I mean art as in a space to kind of create and explore, perhaps in all different senses, sensorially in many different directions, being a space that I could have control and ownership of from a really, like for as long as I can remember, from childhood. That was a place I could go to, and I create the boundary for it, and I. So I think as I got older, I then sort of realised, not until my 20s actually, that I could go to art school, and actually maybe do a degree or something in this. But it was always a space that is like a refuge and just really positive and like part of who I am. So I think, and then I loved going to art school. Actually, it was like the first time I felt like I was properly in a space where I sort of understood what was going on and I could share the communication with people more easily. But I was incredibly privileged to go to university at a time where there was a grant system. And the fact that university anyway was like, there were so many boundaries to go into it, and the fact that now there's so many more boundaries to go into it, and it sets up all these elitist parameters around how people can access creative spaces and art, and who's an artist and who isn't an artist. And I kind of I don't like those parameters. But I also recognise within myself, because I'm a product in a way of the society that I've grown up in, and perhaps from my parental ambitions for me and who I am, that I had really ingrained in me an ambition to be part of this kind of elitist, hierarchical thing that, there's your validation, here's another bit of validation. So within me, perhaps from an activist perspective, was something around acknowledging that and arguing with it, sort of challenging it within myself, and then trying to keep check of where I might be kind of perpetrating or continuing or, helping out that all those elitist kind of hierarchies that I'm not interested in, and I'd rather smash up.
Great. So we can return to the question of all, the topic of boundaries, because it's such a rich one. I'm interested in the sense of boundary and direction. So then you could, as you started and you found it a refuge, you then started to choose a direction out of it, out of just a refuge, into a more public space, if you like. First of all, I was going to college, and choosing a specific medium or subject, or was that always something that you knew that you wanted to make?
I think I kind of had, I always wanted to just use whatever I could get my hands on, and kind of sort of revolted against that notion of being aligned to a particular way of doing something. I kind of like to learn methods and processes and then use them in whatever way I choose to use them, and sort of mix things up a bit. But it's a bit like that again. I definitely had at one point in my life, like as a really young person, this kind of fantasy of being a sort of romantic painting artist, and that's just not me. And I'm interested in how those layers of like being sold some kind of fantasy or potential, and then trying to perform it, and then being like, yeah, but it's not me. Why am I trying to do that? I mean, back at, like, I remember as a sort of 12-year-old really wanting to like fit in at school, and I was from grew up in a queer household, and we had divorced parents anyway, so in the early 80s this was all quite different in Cornwall, and I really set my heart on getting this dress from Tammy Girl that had like bat wings, and it was like pastel colours and stuff. I mean, it's pretty gross. And I thought, I'm going to get this dress and then I'll wear that to these parties, and it'll be like, great, I've got the right dress. Because my mum worked for like young fashion designers in London, so I was always coming home from visiting her with like really bright coloured like body map style like outfits, and happily wearing them to non-uniform day, and everyone being like, I'm like, oh, damn. That didn't work again. So I got this dress, and I wore it all the time, and I've seen pictures of me wearing it. It's like, there's the dress, and then there's me sort of underneath the dress. And it just didn't work out. And I often think of that as almost like my own sort of fable, if you like, to sort of remind myself, like through my life, I'm like, remember the Tammy Girl dress? Oh shit, yeah, I did that again, didn't I? Anyway,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's something about, conformity, but also a kind of sense of the other and the weird, and your influence from your mother, which was coming in and sparking, perhaps the notion of connection, but also
Yeah.
And as a dress, you can try it on, can't you? And wear it, and then it doesn't quite work. But you have to work that out, don't
Or
you?
you hoik it up and stuff it in your pants so that you can actually move your legs properly. Which I still do, actually. If you ever see me on the cliff pass with my dresses stuck in my pants, that's what I'm doing. Thinking about art materials there and processes is that the rubbish sculptures, say, within Mescla, are really part of that. Like sculpture and art, and it can be made of anything. It's kind of really unimportant in a way what the materials are. Obviously, materials carry their own importance and significance in relation to like all kinds of content and context, but essentially anything can be used to make art or present art. And obviously, within the sort of formal Western tradition of art, like that has been sort of presented like since Duchamp and the Surrealists and all of that, so loads of my previous sculptures all contain rubbish that I would then wrap with like electrical tape. And even on my degree, I made an installation out of fridges that people were leaving on the street. It's around the time that CFCs had been banned, but councils wouldn't take fridges away, so people just left fridges around outside. I collected all these, it was 13 fridges, and took them apart and cleaned them up and built a sort of city out of them, and filled sort of spaces within the fridges with like undiluted bubble bath and washing up liquid and orange squash and things like this. So you had this kind of modernist, futuristic kind of cityscape made out of old fridges. So I've always, like, this kind of making things out of rubbish is part of my trajectory. And I think concept-wise or content-wise, it's also part of my kind of personal attitude of being resourceful and trying to be careful about how much resource I use, not being wasteful, and I suppose that's that, like, growing up as well with experiencing like poverty and coming from a lower socioeconomic sort of experience, you always, like, that's part of the tradition, reuse everything's passed down. So I think that's carried on through my attitude towards art making.
So that comes from a slightly different direction, from a kind of eco climate activism kind of thing. It links up obviously and joins up, but it's coming also from personal and family experience and the way you were brought up and what you see. What I'm also hearing is, apart from the revolting, which I want to go back to, what you revolt against, because that's interesting to us at Dreadnought. We're always looking for revolting women who are looking to overturn, if you like, revolving and revolting. Well, how can we, in small ways and larger ways, revolt against systems that we feel keep us oppressed in some way or other? But I wanted to just continue the theme a little bit about making with rubbish and making transforming things. When I heard you talking about the fridges, what you see, or what we might see, is an old fridge, or on the street for a particular. And so we follow a line. We might follow a line, and for every one of us here, it would be a different thought about that fridge. And then you do something with it which transforms it. You fill it with something, you take it apart, you do something. So which for me is the artistic process, is a transformative one. what can I do with these objects, this object, and what can it be? So there's a kind of sense of what lies ahead with that object for you, and how you'll process. So do you kind of dive in, or do you see something straight away and think, oh, that will do that, I'm going to do that with that?
No, it's all very like just process based, and spending time with something and having a little play. And I think it's important to say, like, thinking about boundaries as well and artwork is, you know, potentially like an exhibition is a boundary, is a marker, you know. But I really hold the right with all my work to change it after that. You know, if it's been exhibited past that marker point, it's not a finished piece of work, it can then be taken apart and used in something else. Right. I mean, obviously, there's a commercial aspect. If you sell a work, you know, how keen are the people who bought it going to be if you rock up and want to take it apart and do something else with it? But, like, don't know, haven't tested that out yet. Yeah. But it's always evolving, like it's its own thing, and it's always evolving from our perspective. Like our perspective shifts all the time, doesn't it? So those objects that we make shift and change with that different view. Yeah. And I think being with it, being with something, and creating space for it to kind of find its way, like it wants a bit of this or it wants a bit of that, it's like a conversation with the materials and the forms and the sort of content, and then what it's talking about, and sort of trying to pay attention to perhaps what the work is talking about and what it might be communicating to someone else.
That does revolt, doesn't it, against the standard ideas that we have perhaps about art in galleries or art in different places, art on the wall. That there it is, it's done, it's finished, it's in a frame, it's fixed, and it is, and that's kind of ends there. Can still be enjoyed, of course, but there's something that you don't very often do anything with that. It stays as it is. And there's something very interesting about the fluidity of the way you perceive making, that it goes on, that it's much more a living thing rather than a fixed, stopped thing. Yeah.
And I think to be fair, that's quite common. I think a lot of artists do work like that. That the work's constantly sort of evolving, and they're testing things out and evolving with it, and it's that. I mean, it has always been part of my mind, in my mind since sort of going to degree and being like, oh, okay, I've got access to this so-called art world. I always wanted to make work that couldn't easily be commodified or purchased, which is a bit of like shooting yourself in the foot, isn't it? But I have then, like, I do sometimes make drawings and things that can be framed, that are framed, that can sell, and that sometimes sell. But I feel like I want everyone to be able to have access to this kind of, this fun space. Whether it be, like, not necessarily visual or material, but, if it's sonic or whatever it is, it's like that's, for me, it's like that's how we take over the world, sort of thing. Like, and you see it, how the boundaries that are set, like, I've done some, like, TA work, like teaching assistant work in primary schools and things while I was doing my plumbing training. And so that was probably about 8 years ago. And just seeing the boundaries around like children's creativity, like, okay, stop drawing now, put your pencil down. Like, that's all taking away their power and autonomy and their understanding of themselves, and absolutely sort of stymieing that intellectual sort of thread that's being developed through that drawing or that. And like, I'm neurodivergent, and working with young neurodivergent children and seeing how they were treated in, like, if they became upset because they couldn't complete a drawing or something, they're just absolutely, like, squashed. You're creating a problem, leave the room. And that was really traumatic to be around.
Yeah. We were hearing from Saffron actually yesterday about children in primary school. There's this huge buzzer that goes off every half an hour for the end of the lesson. I mean, violent sound that says that's the end of that lesson, and you move on to the next thing. And so there's nothing. It feels very violent. It's abusive, really.
It's an intensive training program to become like
compliant
workers.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hello.
Done.
Who's listening? Oh no. Yeah. So from the get-go, I suppose I don't remember it as being quite that bad until I started working in HE, and things became much more. You had to comply, you had to fit in, you had to get your modules, you had to do that in order to get a degree, you had to pass through this to get to this, to get to that. And all that, it just seemed like I had nothing to do with education as in the arts, which was what I was into. So that kind of sense of how does this work, and how do you counter it? How do you work with young people to think of other ways of doing, other ways of seeing, other ways of perceiving things. And boundaries are, a lot is talked about boundaries, isn't it? And there's a kind of sense of psychological boundaries, physical boundaries, land boundaries, the kind of sense of where do you set your parameters, if you want to call them a parameter. And how porous are they? You talk about supple and subtle boundaries, and things that are constantly in movement, so that you're actually. It could be a boundary today. It's Thursday. Next Monday, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, maybe it wasn't, but now it is, and that's you. That's what you want to have, and you should be able to have. So it comes with that kind of sense of what is it then that moves us through this rather fluid, like a river, if you like. It's never the same water twice.
Yeah.
So that you're constantly putting your foot in fresh water and having to rethink it, to say, so where am I today? What's happening today?
Someone told me something once about experiences of trauma and how our life can be like a spiral, and so sometimes you can feel as though you're in a trauma again that's like one you've experienced, but it's a bit away from it. And it's like, they described it almost like a bruise that's sort of coming through, if you imagine like a spiral going on.
Yeah, spiral dynamics.
Yeah. And I think I was about 18 at the time, and it helped me think about, okay, maybe it doesn't mean I have to stay in the moment that was traumatic. Yeah. It does move on. So that thing about stepping in fresh water, it's like, but sometimes the water actually has got a bit of a temperature dynamic going on that is familiar.
Yes.
And that can be unsettling or comforting, like dependent.
That's right.
A lot of my work and thinking around boundaries sort of came around the fact that I felt like I had very confused boundaries that were perhaps different to what might be like accepted, inverted commas. And I spent a lot of time sort of trying to work out what my edges were. And through my work, I often reference landscape and Cornwall, like the landmass of Cornwall, seems to have very clear sort of delineated edges. And there's a comfort in that, but there's also a restriction and a suffocation about that as well. And I think, like, sometimes thinking about how the sort of the continental connection, that the land actually going under the sea extends out those boundaries, has been helpful to think about. And actually something that Levita spoke about, taking part in a symposium here at Kresen, talking about the sea and the shifting space of the sea, and then this idea of like this body of water that travels around the globe and potentially being particles of the same water. Like that also really helped, like, or chimed with some of my thinking around boundaries and shifting boundaries, and that work around, like, specifically sort of laying out what supple and subtle boundaries are, was really sort of important to me at the time, just acknowledging, okay, I can say this is my boundary today, but that's my boundary tomorrow, and maybe in a month's time it will be closer still or further away, or
that's right. And sometimes it's important to hold something close until you feel like you understand it better, because if it's too permeable, then things might get lost. But I'm thinking, as you were talking, because I was born in Devon, but of immigrant family, that there's a kind of sense that, European immigrant family, that there's a sense that Devon, there was always a hard edge between Devon and Cornwall. Harder than Devon and Somerset, or, really, like, for starting, you had to pay to get out on the bridge and things like that. But there was, definitely a sense the Cornish were very, there was a nationalism, and I've always been a bit kind of anti-nationalism and anti-flag waving. I'm this, I'm that, I'm a Brit, I'm whoever. And yet understanding that people enjoy the identity of something that gives them a tribe, if you like, or gives them a kind of sense of where they belong and who they are. And I've always wanted to be kind of a planet person, a human person, a European person, something which goes wider than a county. And so that's a contradiction for me. It's a struggle that I have with the boundaries of which sometimes if you drive across a different way, and then there's a sign that says Cornwall, or there's a sign that says something else, and you think, suddenly I'm driving, and boom, I'm in another place.
I'm fascinated by that moment, like, because it's kind of arbitrary, that land border, but it isn't arbitrary, like, politically and administratively. And then, like, we think about national borders, of course, how it actually affects people's freedoms. And one person's allowed to do one thing, but lives, like, I don't know, half a mile away from someone else who's not allowed to do that thing. And when it comes from, like, the Cornish perspective, like Cornish identity, for me, it's almost like it's not a choice. It just is, and that. So, yeah, it is me, and I think it becomes really politicised because there are a lot of people within Britain who deny it.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes politicised.
Right.
It's not political if no one said it didn't exist.
Right.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I've, I'm like, there's loads of nationalism I don't like. But I feel potentially like I'm radicalised around Cornish identity because so many people have told me it doesn't exist, and it's just, so I'm like, yeah, I'll show you something. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I don't know. Well, we can open that up to other people as well to think about what that means for people who feel Cornish or are Cornish, and those of us who are not and feel other Cornish, but also feel a draw to. And I heard you talking to Carolyn, who lives in Galicia in Spain, and there are various places where there's a strong sense of identity, that has connections to other places, Celtic, for instance, connections to other places in the world. And I think that sense of the sea and what goes under and through the rock and through the different stratas that we don't even see. There's that, and then there's the sky as well, which doesn't have boundaries at all, and it isn't held by anything, just keeps moving.
Except again, yes, it does like politically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I think all of these things are like, they can be useful. Like for me, for instance, I made a load of work, like again, a long time ago now, about how rock's always moving, and just about how these different paces of movement, and so everything's basically always changing. And any notion of sort of fixedness, like for a moment, it can be nice to rest with some fixedness, but everything is always moving, and I can't remember what I was going to say then. Oh yeah, and the thing around that I think can be used, that say with Mescla, that I try and open this conversation up around what Cornish identity is because there are a lot of people who actually do put a line down and say, this person can't be Cornish, this person can be Cornish. And I want to challenge that view. And then there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, Cornishness, that's not a thing, like it's not real. So I want to challenge that view as well. Mm-hmm. And I want to create a space where people can as well feel like, that they can talk about it from their perspective. It's not like right or wrong, it's a personal experience of identity. There's an awful lot of laying down upon others of what, they can or cannot sort of feel or be. I think that using the position of being a Celtic nation with a recognised national minority status within the political nation of England is a pivot that can be used to discuss other issues within our context of Britain. I think that I'm happy to use that, if you like. And I think for the future, like using maybe networks of like Indigenous language networks or Celtic Nations networks. There's so much more potential to look out to sea rather than sort of up to like a governmental space in London. And that can open up other broader conversations. And I also, you know, there's a lot of pride in Cornwall around like diaspora mining, but there's also lots and lots of conversation around taking diaspora communities thinking about their responsibilities, about Cornwall itself, thinking about its responsibilities within how we treat this, how we talk about diaspora mining and our heritage. And there's so much there that I think, as a place for us to go forward in sort of strength and positivity and openness, we need to acknowledge, and not just acknowledge, but kind of talk about and own and think about what we do with. Like, it's not okay just to like have a mining festival and talk about hating the English. That's not like that's not getting anyone anywhere, really.
No. So, yes, it's became a bit stuck. But lots of people are doing that, and I think that one of the things that you've talked about is, and it's very clear from the way you're speaking, is a playful quality as well. There's a serious quality, really important, serious questioning and thinking going on, and then there's the playful aspect of it. You know, how do we play with this in order to release something? And I think that, you know, we've already talked about children and education and how, you know, a lot of people that I've worked with, you know, stopped playing really when they were about 7 and haven't really started again unless they've done, you know, some sporting activity, they call that play, or have children around them in some way and play with children. But that the playful exploration of things doesn't happen. And you've mentioned play a few times, and I was just wondering about, you know, where your current preoccupations are and how useful play is to you, how you continue to make yourself play with something or allow yourself to play.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, that's kind of, just do. It's kind of part of my, makeup, and maybe I'm lucky, you know, that I've been able to continue to do that and find parameters or set up means that I can still do that. You know, play has a place. I'm not playing if I'm servicing someone's gas boiler, but I do think.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that play is really powerful and political and important, and and it's of course belittled, you know, all the time. I think the next sort of part of the project I'm developing some activities where we kind of play with the Cornish language and colour. Okay. So Cornwall has a really small like lexicon of colours. So I'm going to run workshops with people where we can sort of paint rubbish sculptures and find names in Cornish for the colours that we use. And if they don't exist, then make them up using Cornish dictionaries and support from Cornish language speakers. And I'm really excited about that. And it's really supported by the Cornish Language Service at Council. And I think, just that democratising access to the language. Again, like Cornish language it was always really important to me that it existed, and I always felt like I could kind of use it however I wanted. But when I tried to learn Cornish, for instance, with proper sort of lessons, if you like, how one might learn other languages, I really struggle with that, and that's partly because I'm neurodivergent, and I can't even in English remember what all the conjunctions are and sort of, tenses and things. But we can have ownership of a language by just using it in a really fluid way, sort of dropping in odd words, picking up a word, like it's ours to kind of do with what we want, and if we don't use it and play with it, it goes back on the extinct list, like.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a power to that, and the Cornish, like the vocabulary would have been larger if it hadn't have been so restricted, in the past. So I think that's the next sort of line of play.
It reminds me of Iceland. I worked in Iceland for some time, and there everything, the language has to be so ordered and set, and they keep out things that might blur the edges of the Viking Icelandic. So that it becomes very stuck, and it doesn't grow because it can't, because it's not really attending to what they see as the interlopers of other languages coming in and changing the way Viking is spoken. But I think it's also a wonderful notion to play with language anyway, because so much language that we have is like and doesn't do the job. Quite often you have a word or words, a set of words, and you think, well, that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
And then so then I suppose we rely on other people to invent words. Natalie's very good at inventing language and making words. So poets, or that there's another way of thinking language other than the grammatical, the way we learn it at school and the way it's supposed to be spoken.
Yeah.
And how does that actually manifest what you mean and what you want to mean?
Yeah. And I just wanted to say about that thing with the ice, and that, like, I don't obviously know anything about that, and I can understand other reasons why people may wish to protect a language, and but I think in our very particular situation right here in Cornwall, I think it's kind of right. It is right for play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's that kind of being torn a little bit, isn't it? Like I want the Tammy girl dress, but it doesn't really do what I want it to do. It doesn't really fit me. It's really comforting if things stay the same as I need them. That's not really the world I want to live in.
No,
so I think that can be the situation with language as well. And maybe there's something there just generally about accepting more fluidity, generally.
Yeah.
And perhaps since we've, again, very much thinking about Britain, really, we've become really distanced from the processes of the natural world. So we are perhaps less attentive to sort of natural cases of just fluidity all the time, like shifting and changing and the subtleties of that.
Yeah, and very harsh critics and judgmental about things. So you don't use the right language, that can get you into lots of hot water. I'm sure we've all felt silenced at different times when you think, is that the right terminology, or is that the right word that I should use, or I think I might have used the wrong word there, or, you know, and with things opening up, or, you know, on the one hand, which is fantastic, things can also close down, and there's always these kind of different truths that you're carrying, and language is a huge marker of that. What do I know, and what do I understand, like something, and very easily jumped on others.
I've often not just not spoken because I can't remember if the word I want to use is the right word or not, or what it means, or if I've gotten something wrong. And maybe that's another thing. Like it's kind of fine to get things wrong, just maybe that's part of the sort of fluidity.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting, you know, you use the term rubbish, and it means different things, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Rubbish, and it's your material.
Yeah, I mean, I always make a joke like, people will be saying I've been making rubbish sculptures for years. But kind of, it is.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true. Somebody else's rubbish, though, it's like weeds, you know, they're just in the wrong place. Or, you know, valuing. I think the thing that you talk about, when you value something, you make something from that, it gains value. And that's, you know, so it's lost value, but then it gains value. And I think that's a really important thing to recognise as well. So shall we?
I reckon,
because you know, you've been so amazingly compliant. And